Hey folks, welcome to another episode of The Tune Up here on Passion for Sound. Before we get into talking about this month's albums, I just want to cover off a couple of things quickly, and the first is to say, as always, a huge thanks to the sponsor of this episode, and that's Linsol. Linsol is an online retailer with lots of different brands. I'll put a link down below in the description so you can check out everything they have to offer. But this tune-up series is being made possible by Linsol, and it's allowed me to branch out away from the normal product reviews. So I want to say a huge thanks to them, and if you're enjoying the tune-up series, then click through the link down below, check out Linsol, and purchase your next piece of gear from them as a way of saying thank you. Assuming there's gear there that you want, of course. I'm not trying to pressure you into buying things, but if they've got something you want, use them instead of another retailer, and that's a great way of saying thank you. While we're talking about those enjoying the tune-up though, I do want to flag that the tune-up hasn't been as popular as I hoped. I thought this might be a series that would be of broad-reaching appeal to people who are looking for new music to enjoy on their systems. But the videos haven't been performing as well as my regular product reviews, and I raise that for two reasons. Firstly, if you're enjoying the tune-up each month and you want to see it keep going, can I ask you to make sure you hit the like button and also maybe consider sharing it on a forum with some friends, wherever you might think it would work well, share it with some people, and let's see if we can get this one to grow so I can keep it running. Alternatively, if you're watching this but you feel a bit lukewarm about the series, then drop a comment down below and let me know if there's something different you'd like to see. Either a different approach to the music or a different approach to a different topic, something other than product reviews that you'd like to see on a monthly basis, let me know in the comments down below. I'm always looking to find new and interesting content to share with you. And so now with that out of the way, let's jump into this month's music. And I have to say, I had a really hard time choosing albums this month. If you watched the previous episode from March, you'll know that I mixed up my approach to this and added in 2 albums per month instead of 1, and my focus has become doing one brand new album that's a new release and one that's from whenever, it's just an album that I love. And as I went through all the new release albums for this month's tune-up, I really had a hard time choosing one. There were some interesting albums, but nothing that really stood out to me. In the end, what I chose was a classical album, but I do want to give a special mention to College Park by Logic. That one was very nearly my selection. It's a rap album, it's a really enjoyable album, and it's also really nicely produced, so check that one out if you're into rap. Maybe you know Logic, but you didn't realise they had a new album. But either way, that one nearly made it in, but I decided to go in a slightly different direction and go with a classical album this month. And the album I've chosen is more because of its production quality and its instrumentation rather than specifically the musical content, which is not to say it's a bad listen, but I can't sit here and say this is my favourite classical album that I've heard for a while. But it is a very nice classical album, it's got a good range of tracks on it, and it's also beautifully recorded. And specifically, and I hope I'm going to say this right, the album we're talking about is Hélène Grimaud, I'm guessing is her name. It's French, so if I'm pronouncing that wrong, let me know in the comments down below. But it's Hélène Grimaud plays Shostakovich and Rachmaninoff. Well, actually, I've got that the wrong way around. It's Rachmaninoff and Shostakovich, but you'll see it. I've got a link down in the description below. This album was a January 2023 release. It's on Deutsche Grammophon, which as always means it's going to be really nicely recorded and mastered. And the producer for this album is Jan Vogler, who's also a cellist on the album itself. And one of the things that made this album interesting to me is it's mostly solo piano, but it's with accompaniments of solo violin and solo cello. So it's a very stripped back classical album, and that makes it really interesting from a sonic point of view, and also just a bit different. It's not your run-of-the-mill classical orchestra type album, it's much more intimate, it's much more a chamber feel, and it's mostly focused on the piano with, as I said, those accompanying string instruments. But always it's one string instrument and the piano. The recording on this album is incredibly crisp and clean. And one of the things I noticed as I listened to it was just how much of the room you can hear. There were multiple times that I took my headphones off to check if something was going on in the house, because you can hear little things in the recording like one of the musicians shifting in their chair, and it's got such a nice sense of space around the recording that you don't necessarily know if the sound is coming from your headphones or speakers or if it's actually in the environment around you. And that to me is always a fun listening experience. One of the other benefits of the clean recording is that you're going to hear things like the slapping of the cello strings against the fingerboard in the more sort of upbeat moments of the music. There's lots of texture, lots of detail coming through. But at the same time, it's balanced off really well with things like the richness and the resonance of the piano and the cello in particular. So there's body and fullness to the sound, but lots of crispness and clarity too. There was actually another album that I considered for this episode, which coincidentally was also Rachmaninoff, but on that occasion it was an orchestral recording. And one thing that was really interesting to me was the distinction of the recording qualities. The orchestral recording, and I'm sorry I haven't got in my notes which one it wasn't a huge standout, but it was a new release orchestral recording of Rachmaninoff compositions. And the differences were really interesting in that the orchestral recording was smooth and rich and lush. It didn't come across as being a particularly strong recording. And then I came across to this one and it was absolutely crystal clear. Every sound was right there for you to hear and almost feel. Even things like the piano and the percussive nature of the piano is beautifully rendered in this recording. And so I'm not going to try and pull out any standout tracks from this one. As is often the case with classical compositions, it's more about the journey it takes you on than an individual track here or there. And so what I'd say is that if you're looking for a wonderful and enjoyable classical album that's also beautifully recorded and great for testing systems, then do check out Hélène Grimaud plays Rachmaninoff and Shostakovich. As I said, I'll put a link down in the description below. Let me know in the comments if you try it and what you think of it. And so that brings us to the end of the new release section. Let's now talk about an album that I just love. And this one was a pretty easy selection. I was skimming through some of my favourites. This one popped up and it was a no-brainer for me to include it. The album I'm talking about is Our New Orleans, and this was a benefit album back in 2005 to raise money to help the victims of Hurricane Katrina. It pulls together music from some of New Orleans' greatest musicians, those that are still alive, of course. And so you're going to get to hear people like Alan Toussaint, Dr. John, Randy Newman, Ry Cooder's on there, the Dirty Dozen Brass Band as well. There's lots of great musicians on the album. Harry Connick Jr. is noticeably missing, but there's still plenty of others. One of the things I love about this music is that it merges some blues, some jazz, some zydeco, and it's all delivered with a New Orleans feel to it and a wonderful recording quality too. In fact, this album includes at least one track that is in my curated playlist for patrons, and it's one of my go-to test tracks. I'm not going to say specifically which one because that's for patrons, but know that this album has some fantastic opportunities if you're looking for test tracks. Speaking of specific tracks, there are so many that I could have chosen from this one to share with you today as my highlights, and I've chosen 3 that happen to be all upbeat, but I also want to give special mention to a couple of others, and I'm going to look at my notes for this one so I don't mess it up for the 5th time. One of them is Tous les jours, c'est pas la même, and that's by Carol Fran. And then there's also 2 versions of Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans, and that's kind of interesting because there's such different interpretations. They're still both relatively slow jazz numbers, but just delivered a bit differently, and that in itself to me is interesting to hear the different interpretations of some local New Orleans singers singing a song about their hometown. The specific artists singing those 2 versions are Deville Crawford and the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. But of the 3 tracks that I want to highlight, the first one is actually the first track on the album, and that's Yes We Can by Alan Toussaint. This is a great, understated New Orleans funk track, and this really sets a tone for what I love most about this album, and that's the New Orleans rhythms. And you're going to see a theme here with these 3 tracks, and it's all about that New Orleans rhythm. It's a unique sort of feel to the percussion and the way the music rolls, and it's just something I love about the New Orleans jazz scene. Moving on from Yes We Can, and I think I said before just Yes We Can, but the name is actually Yes We Can. Moving on from that track, the next one that stood out to me is Brother John Is Gone / Herc Jolly John, and that's by the Wild Magnolias. I think this was actually the track that first had me discover this album because I was looking for another recording of this particular track. And one of the things I love about this, other than the fact that again it's got that wonderful kind of New Orleans jazz rhythm to it, but in addition to this, it's a large group. I think it might have been recorded outdoors because there's this huge sense of space in the recording. And what I love most about it is you can hear all the different placements of sounds, all the different musicians and artists within the recording spread out through space. It's a very catchy tune, it's very easy to groove along with, and it also happens to sound great, particularly for things like soundstage and imaging tests. The final track that I want to highlight now is My Feet Can't Fail Me Now by Dirty Dozen Brass Band. And this again is another one of those rhythmic joys. It just has that brilliant flow to it, that brilliant rhythm that, for me at least, makes it very hard not to tap my feet and bob my head and just really get into the groove of the music. In particular, I think of all the tracks on the album, this one is the most catchy. I think it's ridiculously catchy. I'll be interested if you find it to be the same, let me know in the comments. But in addition to those rhythms, there's also a wonderful range of textures and timbres here because it is a brass band and they're also singing from time to time as well. And so really there's lots to like in this whole album. As I said before, I've highlighted 3 specific tracks here that happen to be upbeat because they're the ones that I keep going back to time and time again. But there are so many great tracks in here. There's slower, more introspective tracks. There's stripped back tracks. There's busier and fuller tracks. There's lots and lots to hear, and it's all really well recorded and great music. And so hopefully you'll enjoy that album. Hopefully you'll enjoy the classical album I mentioned as well. And hopefully you've enjoyed the tune-up overall. As I said before, if you are enjoying the tune-up and you want to see it keep going, then hit the like button to let me know that I should keep recording these. Or if you've got a different and better idea, pop it in the comments down below. I'd love the feedback. Also, don't forget, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes of the Tune-Up or whatever this evolves into. But for now, let me leave to the music, so happy listening, I hope you enjoy the albums, and I'll look forward to seeing you here next time on Passion for Sound.